Hey everyone, I'm Sam with Rokoko, and in this video we're going to walk through retargeting in Maya in 2025. We're going to walk through how to retarget motion capture to a character, how to add a control rig to that character, how to do some smoothing, how to use the animation layer system, and also just talk about why Maya still reigns supreme when it comes to just straight up retargeting and working with motion capture in terms of accuracy. This is going to be more of a basic tutorial. We're not going over anything super crazy in this, but if you just want a refresher on retargeting in Maya, or if you're just getting into retargeting motion capture in Maya for the first time, this can be a good place to start. However, I'm also not a Maya expert, so if you see anything I'm doing wrong or you have a comment, put it down below and I'll pin the comment just so everyone knows, if I made a mistake. Okay. So a couple things before we get started. The first thing is just that Maya has not changed a lot in all the years that I've been using Maya and all the years everyone's been using Maya. And that's actually one of the great things about it. This workflow is essentially the same as it was 5 years ago. And while that might sound like a negative to some people, if you've been using Unreal Engine or Blender, you know that with all the new updates that are always happening, workflows break, things change, and you kind of have to get reacquainted to a whole new workflow every time there's a version change. Not so with Maya. And that's why, especially for a lot of the bigger studios, Maya is a really safe bet because it's just not going to change a lot. The other thing that I want to point out before we get started is something that makes Maya really special when it comes to motion capture retargeting. In motion capture, we have this problem across all different types of mocap, for any type of mocap. When you have motion capture from an actor who has specific proportions and you're trying to take that motion capture and put it on a character who has different proportions. And especially when it comes to leg lengths, what this ends up creating is foot drift. Because while your motion capture might not have foot drift, once you put that mocap onto a character with different sized legs, you inevitably are going to have feet sliding around on the floor and things not looking great. The amazing thing about Maya is that through a combination of a bunch of different reasons and stuff that they have going on in the background, action spaces and dynamic measuring of hip height and all these different things, this is not a problem in Maya. So you can take motion capture and put it on like a dwarf character from Lord of the Rings who, is much lower to the ground, has much shorter legs than your motion capture performer in real life, and their feet will be stuck to the floor perfectly. And we'll go through an example of this later in the tutorial, but this is a good reason for why people use Maya, to prep motion capture, even if they're ultimately going to be working in Blender or Cinema 4D or Unreal Engine or Unity, because in Maya, all of this foot sliding is just taken care of for you. And I cannot overemphasize how amazing that is. And if you've ever tried to do retargeting in the other programs, you know that this can be a big problem. If you are looking for high-end motion capture retargeting, it might be worth looking into Maya and Motion Builder. We'll have another tutorial for Motion Builder in the future. But one of those two programs to fix foot sliding, even if you're not working in Maya ultimately. Okay. Let's jump into the actual workflow now. So the first thing we'll do is just record our motion capture in Rokoko Studio. Here I'm wearing a SmartSuit Pro 2 with my smart gloves. Now because I know we want to do some editing as well, I have grabbed a gun prop, and you can see that these hands don't quite match up, which is a very typical thing that you have to deal with when working with inertial motion capture. Thankfully, it's something we'll be easily able to fix in Maya. Now after the recording, I'll go through and just do my typical cleanup process, which takes about a minute. Then I can rename my clip and get ready to export. So when I'm working in Maya, I'm going to change the skeleton options to human IK. Then I'm going to disable the meshes and the facial data. You can keep the mesh if you want. I wouldn't use the facial data unless you're actually recording facial mocap because it adds a lot of unnecessary blend shapes. Then I'll go and change my FPS to 24. And I like to make sure that extract root motion is off. And I also turn off use constant key reducer because I find it just gives a cleaner result in Maya. Then I'll hit export. So here I am in a brand new Maya 2026.1 project file, but this workflow should work with previous versions of Maya as well. I'll go and import the character we'll be working with, In this case, I have FBX selected and I've just set my units to automatic, and that should work for this character. But you'll see when I go through and import my motion capture that when I do my initial import, our mocap is way too big. That's easy to fix. I'll just go and re-import my motion capture, and this time go down to units and just change them appropriately depending on what your FBX is like. In this case, it was changing it to decimeters. And there we go. Now our mocap and our character are the same size, although they don't actually need to be the same size in your project for this workflow to work. Now we are going to take care of something that is hugely important for this workflow. In the Maya retargeting process with human IK, it's super easy for Maya to get confused if you aren't explicit about the namespaces between your motion capture and your character. So I'll shift click to expand out my entire mocap skeleton. Then I'll select all the joints in the skeleton, go up to Windows, General, Namespace Editor. I'll create a new namespace and rename it mocap. And then I'll hit add selected to add in all of my mocap bones, joints, meshes, whatever it is into that namespace. And this is going to prevent Maya from getting really weird during the retargeting process and giving us a lot of errors. This is a massively important step in this process, so do not forget it. Now, if I bring my mocap skeleton over, you can see that my mocap is in a T-pose, but my character is not. And I chose this character so I could demonstrate what to do in that situation. We need our character to match the initial pose of our motion capture. So in this case, we're just gonna go through and we'll start with the upper arms and we'll just kind of put them into a T-pose. Then I'll grab the wrist and move that a little bit. I could go into the channel box editor and, zero out the rotation. I'm not going to for this demonstration, but ideally you would want your arms and fingers to be lying completely flat. I'll time lapse through this, but if I pull out the skeleton again, you can always use the motion capture joints as a reference point for when you're doing this process for the T-pose. Now we can move on to the actual retargeting. So I'll go up and click on the Human IK button, and then I'll create new character definition. You can see we have this little map of a character. And now what we're going to do is basically tell Maya, hey, this is the upper left arm of my character. Here it is in this little map. Here's the lower arm. Here it is on the map. And this way Maya knows how to bring the animation from your motion capture accurately onto your character's skeleton. This is a pretty easy process, and the great thing is that you can always save out this bone map, so you only need to do it once when you're working with the same character. So I'm going to start with the pelvis, and you can see I'm not using the root because the root is at the bottom of the character. We want to start with the hip bone. So sometimes this is called hip, sometimes pelvis. I'll right click on the hip bone on my map and then assign selected bone. And I'll go through and do this for all of the spine bones. You can see I can click into this little arrow to add in the rest of the spine bones here. And then I can use the down key on my keyboard to just move between the bones. And you can assign as many of these bones as you need to. You can see there's a bunch of other bones here, but they aren't actually spine bones, so I'm not going to assign them on this map. Next, I'll grab this collar bone, go into the little arrow, into the shoulder, assign it. And when I jump back out, you can see that we also have a green indicator on the right bone, and that's because mirror matching is enabled. And this makes it so that when I'm filling out this bone list for the left side, the right side is automatically being filled out as well. This will only work if your naming conventions are correct on your bones, but it works for most models. And I'll go through and do the upper arm bone, and then I'll do the lower arm bone. If I ever need to check, I can just rotate them around and make sure I'm selecting the right bones. I'll assign this, then I'll assign the wrist, which in this case is actually the hand bone. Remember, if there are any doubts, just rotate the bone around to figure out which one is which. I'll click into the little arrow and I can go and do my fingers. Now on our character, you can see we have this meta index bone, and then we have index 1, 2, and 3. Meta in this case stands for metacarpal, so basically the bones that are inside of your hand. Now these are not what we want to be assigning in this little bone map. You can see this bone map starts with your proximal finger joint, or the finger joint itself. We don't want to be moving the bones inside of the hand. So in this case, we're going to start with index 1, and we will assign that to our index finger in our little bone map. And we'll go through again using the arrow keys just to move between the bones and assign each one. And then I'll go through and do this for each finger. And remember, again, mirror matching is on, so I only have to do this for the left hand. I don't have to do it for both. Now, when it comes to the thumb bone, in this character's case, we don't have that meta bone, but you can see that the thumb 1 matches what we see on this little bone map. So you can use the bone map as just a reference for which bone you should be assigning where. So in this case, we'll use thumb 1 as that base bone. Once we jump back out, again, oh, so nice that the right hand is done just via the mirror matching. Now we'll do the neck and head. You can see there are a ton of neck bones on this character. I'm just going to assign the first one. This is really up to you. The great thing about Maya is that even if you filled these all out and there aren't as many neck bones in my motion capture, Maya is going to be able to sort through that automatically. So you can totally fill out all of these bones if you want. In my case, I just did the first neck bone and the head. Then I'll go through and do the legs, starting in that top leg joint. You can see again, there's tons of extra bones in this character's legs and arms. I just need the upper leg and then the lower leg bone. You can get deeper if you want, but you know, for most use cases, especially at a more beginner level, you don't need to use every single bone in your character necessarily. I do like to do the foot and then also the toe base, which is the toe bone of your character, because we do have toe motion capture from Rokoko Studio. And there you go. We are done with our grunt character. I'm going to rename it grunt character. And then I can lock this character definition just because I'm done with it. And then finally, if I wanted to, I could hit save and save this bone map out. So that's really nice because you only need to do this one time, and then you can load that bone map back onto this character in a new project, or if you have characters that share the same skeleton, you can use the same bone map for them. For example, a Mixamo skeleton is shared between any character from Mixamo, so I just have one Mixamo template I can use for all of them. So now we're going to go through and do the same thing for our motion capture. So I'll unhide my mocap, and then I'll create a new character definition, and if I shift click on my mocap joints, you can see my whole list. Now, when we exported out of Rokoko Studio, we used the human IK skeleton. And that's because when we bring the skeleton into Maya, it has a built-in human IK preset for bone maps. So all we need to do is select the hips of our motion capture and then go up to this load folder button. And then from the template list, we'll select HIK, which should just come with Maya, and then hit OK, and you'll see everything is just green from the start, and that saves us a little bit of time on the motion capture end. You can see we have this green check mark, and on our grunt, we have this, exclamation point. That's because the arms and the fingers aren't perfectly aligned to the x-axis. As long as it's not a red cross, you can still do the retargeting. This is just letting you know that the right arm is not parallel to the ground. Now, how do we get our mocap actually onto the character? Well, under character, we'll have our grunt profile selected, but then under source, we will add in that character 1 or Rokoko mocap profile. And once we do that, you can see our grunt kind of pops up in position. And then when we hit play, we have our motion capture on our character. So this all looks good. Our character is moving around. You can see that when we get to the holding the gun portion of the mocap, we're going to have to do some cleanup to adjust the hand positions. And to do that, we'll want to add an IK control rig to this character. Thankfully, it is super easy in Maya to do this, which is not easy in the other programs. But one of the reasons that Maya is so great for this sort of work is because you can very easily add that control rig. Now, I'm going to do it by going up to this blue drop-down button. Then I'll go to Bake, and you can't see it, it's off screen, but it says Bake to Control Rig. I can either bake to the skeleton, which will just bake to the bones of my character, or I can hit bake to control rig, which will create a control rig and then bake my animation to it. And you can see as soon as I do it, Maya will kind of think and go through the whole timeline and bake down my motion capture to a newly created control rig for my character. You can see we have all these keyframes on our character now, and I can select the left wrist controller in this little map. And if I move it around, we have an IK control rig. Again, this is really amazing, and it's not something that is easy to do automatically in the other programs. So this is a huge advantage when it comes to Maya. I can also delete my motion capture now because all of the mocap has been baked onto this control rig. Now, before we get into editing the hand position and doing a little mocap editing, I want to show you how to do some smoothing on your mocap. For a high-end workflow, I definitely recommend doing smoothing. It's also very easy to do in Maya. So what we'll do is go up to Windows, Animation Editors, Graph Editor. Then I'll select every controller in my little map and select all the keyframes in the Graph Editor. After that, I'll go up to Curves, Butterworth Smooth Filter, and I'll click on the little options box. Now, by default, the cutoff frequency is usually at 7. You're not really going to notice a huge difference in your motion capture when you do this. So I usually take this down to like 2.5 or 3. If you go too far, you'll definitely notice because the character will basically not move as much. But if I put it to 3 and then hit apply and close, Maya will think for a second, and essentially what it's doing is just smoothing out all the curves of all the keyframes on my control rig. And the result is you get a much smoother result. And especially for audiences who are used to seeing hand-keyed animation, this can kind of get you a little bit closer to that hand-keyed, heavier vibe, even when you're using motion capture. So this is a great tool to use in Maya. Now, if we want to go through and do some of that mocap editing, we will go to the channel box or layer editor, and you can see we have this little anim panel down here at the bottom right. We have a base animation layer, so this is all the animation that we've already put on our character, but we can add new layers of editing on top of this, and this is a non-destructive workflow, which makes it really easy to not only do the mocap editing, but also if you need to start over, you don't need to redo this whole process because you have that base animation layer. So I'll start with the right hand, and I'll go select it in my little bone map. I can go back to my human IK map at any point, select the right hand controller, then I'll go back to my anim layers, and if I hover over this little blue circle icon on the right, we can add our selected controller to a new layer. So it's called anim layer 1. After that, I'll go to the beginning of where I want my mocap editing to start. I will add a keyframe by hitting S. It's kind of hard to see, it's red in the timeline, but it is there. Then I will go to when I need to change the position of that hand. I will move the hand into position, and this is again so amazing that I can do this via an IK control rig. I don't need to adjust the upper arm bone, the lower arm bone, then the wrist. I can do everything from that wrist controller. Then I'll hit S to add a new keyframe. But then of course I want to remove the edit that I did when my character stops holding the gun with both hands. So now I'll create a new keyframe where I want my mocap edit to end by hitting S. And then I'll go and copy the original keyframe by hitting Shift and dragging along the timeline to encompass the keyframe, then right-clicking and hit Copy, and then right-click and hit Paste later in the timeline. And again, you can always hold Shift and drag along the timeline to grab any of the keyframes that you need to, and then you can move them around. And at the end of this process, you can see that we have this right hand moved into position for the period where I need the hands to be together, and it moves out of that new position when the hands come apart. Now I'll do the same thing for the left hand. I'll add the left wrist controller to a new animation layer, and I'll actually double click on these animation layers and just name them properly, so that keeps everything a little bit more organized if I need to go in and continue to make edits. I just typically create a new layer for each joint or each controller that I'm affecting. Then I will go ahead and do the exact same process of creating keyframes at the beginning of where I want my edit to start, then move the hand into position, create a new keyframe. Then when I need the edit to be ending, I create a new keyframe at the beginning of that motion, and then go and copy the original keyframe and move it to the end, and my hand will move back into its original position. There's also a button in the animation layers panel there that has a 0 on it. Now you can click this and it will zero out any edits that you've done on that layer. So sometimes I will just click that button and it will make the controller go back to its original position instead of copying that original keyframe. And there you go. At the end of this process, we have done a successful little edit for this character and everything is looking really smooth. And this was much easier to do than it is in a lot of the other programs still. And it's kind of why Maya is so great at doing mocap editing. The other thing that's great is I can always go in and turn off these layers if I want to see the original animation, or if I've done something wrong and I need to add a new layer or something. So this system is very non-destructive, procedural, and it makes it very easy to do all of this editing. So you can imagine how you could extrapolate out this workflow to do more editing when it comes to your feet or the head or whatever it needs to be. But now I want to talk about foot sliding and what makes Maya so special when it comes to retargeting motion capture. So I've got a new project here and I've got a little goblin character, and you can see in this case the distance between the hips and the ground for my character and my mocap is wildly different. Also, the proportions of this little character's legs are very different from the proportions of me as the actor. And in a lot of traditional mocap retargeting in the other tools, this creates a lot of issues with foot sliding. For example, let's jump into Unreal Engine, and if I go ahead and just follow the typical Unreal Engine retargeting workflow that we have, and this is a workflow that we recommend, you still end up with a lot of foot sliding issues when you have differently proportioned characters. And you can see it's especially apparent in this moment in the mocap where I'm twisting my hips around. The feet are just sliding all over the place, and that really does not look good, and depending on the situation, it can be very noticeable, very immersion breaking, and very, very painful to fix, because you can think about all the different bones that you would have to affect in order to stick those feet onto the ground, right? Now let's go through and do the exact same workflow we did for our grunt character on this little goblin. I will just retarget the mocap, do nothing special, and bake it to a control rig, and afterwards take a look at the result. The character's feet are perfectly stuck onto the ground. There is some secret sauce that Maya is doing. Part of it has to do with these dynamic action spaces, as they're called in Maya, where it's calculating, the hip height of each character and then dynamically doing some magic to make sure that the feet stay planted. I'm not really sure, and it honestly doesn't really matter. The end result is what matters, and it's that Maya and Motion Builder do not have this foot sliding issue between characters with different proportions to your mocap actors. However it's done, the result is 1,000 times better and 1,000 times easier than it is in the other programs, and it's just kind of one of the strengths of Maya. This is why sometimes I recommend Maya for AAA workflows, even if you're working in another program like Unreal Engine or Cinema 4D or Unity, whatever it is. Maya really excels at mocap retargeting because it's helping you in a lot of ways in the background during this process. So this is worth a specific call out. And if you're looking for that AAA result from your retargeting, it's worth checking out Maya, even if it's not going to be the final program that you're working in. So that's how you use Maya to retarget to a character, to add a control rig, to use the animation layer system to do motion capture editing, to use Butterworth Smoothing to iron out some of the kinks in your mocap. And finally, obviously through this process, you've seen how Maya takes care of that foot sliding issue. This is more of a beginner's tutorial, as I said at the beginning, but hopefully at least this gets you started in retargeting in 2025. And put any comments or questions you have down below. I'm always still trying to learn more about Maya, so if you have a correction, put it down there and I will make sure to pin that comment. Okay. See you in the next one.